Coming up, NatWest Chief Executive Dame Alison Rose has done a U-turn and finally stepped down after admitting she leaked private banking information about Nigel Farage to the BBC. Meanwhile, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has told some of Britain's biggest businesses they must do more with their profits to help people with the cost of living, saying they have a social contract with the public. And the intense European heatwave continues, with Sicily, Algeria and Tunisia now battling wildfires as 20,000 people have been evacuated from the Greek island of Rhodes. The time is nearly 6 minutes past 8 and this is Talk Breakfast. Well, a very good morning to you. Thank you very much indeed for your company this morning. If you look at the front pages of the newspapers, they sort of haven't caught up, really. The front page of the Daily Telegraph, Rose, I leaked the Farage story to the BBC, but I won't resign. The Times saying Number 10 wants NatWest boss to quit over Farage. Well, in fact, Dame Alison Rose has finally stepped down, as I said in that opening link, as Chief Executive of NatWest immediately after she admitted she did indeed leak the private information to Simon Jack, the BBC journalist. Now, obviously, we saw the BBC took a very long time to apologise. Simon Jack finally issued an apology. The BBC, embroiled in yet another controversy, they have finally issued an apology as well. But it seems extraordinary to me that anyone in a position of responsibility at a bank would even remotely discuss confidential information about a client, least of all to actually admit that that person in question, Nigel Farage, was indeed a client of Coutts. That seems absolutely extraordinary. Now, this morning, Nigel Farage has doubled down. He went on to say, Dame Alison Rose has now admitted that she is the source. She broke client confidentiality. She is unfit to be CEO of NatWest Group. He goes further to say, meanwhile, Coutts CEO Peter Flavel must take the ultimate responsibility for debanking me based on my political views. And Sir Howard Davies, who is the chair of NatWest, is responsible for overall governance. He has clearly failed in the task, least of all by endorsing their conduct. In my view, they should all go. And the question is, should they all go? 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222 and tweet us at TalkTV. Joining me now, Michael Jacobs, political economy professor and former advisor to Chancellor and Prime Minister Gordon Brown. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
What do you make about this Nigel Farage scandal? I mean, it seems extraordinary to me that you essentially have a chief executive leaking confidential, personal banking information to a third party, to a journalist she sat next to at a dinner.
I think you and everybody else. It was clearly wrong. Extraordinary that the head of a major bank should behave like that, and she has got her just desserts.
And in terms of that, Nigel Farage obviously not backing down. Just in terms of Howard Davies, the chair of NatWest, and Peter Flavel, who is CEO of Coutts, should they go?
No.
Why not?
Because you can't just sack everybody in an institution.
Why not?
One person is responsible.
But clearly, the thing is, they knew about this. They've had board meetings. Last night, when I went to bed, they said they had full confidence in her. This morning, clearly, she's gone.
And the way you deal with these things is you get rid of the person who's made the error, and they've done that. I don't think this needs to go any wider than that. It's clearly a terrible mistake. The whole thing has been wrong. People in public life, as anywhere else, shouldn't be judged on their political views when they open a bank account. And clearly, nothing should ever have been said to a journalist about this. That was breaching confidentiality. And it's quite right that the person responsible for that has gone. It's a pretty terrible error of judgment. You know how much this person was paid? £5.2 million last year. That indicates that that when the banks and the other big companies say, oh, we have to pay these enormous salaries because we can't get the talent otherwise, you know, they would go abroad. Well, you sometimes wonder how much talent is actually being paid for. So that's a lot of money to be paying for somebody who can make an error like this.
Well, it is indeed. But just going back to the CEO of Coutts, Peter Flavel, surely he is in charge of a bank that was compiling a political dossier on one of their clients, which has absolutely no bearing on whether he should bank at that bank. So therefore, he should go.
Well, I don't, I mean, fine. Yes, why not take another scalp? I don't really see a problem with that. The heads of the bank have many, many more faults. The heads of these banks have many more faults that they've been responsible for. They invest far too much money in land and property, not enough in businesses. What we really want our banks to do is to invest in British businesses so that we can get our productivity and investment rates up. I think we're going to talk about the fact that we've been reeled again to have the second lowest growth rate in the G7. There's much worse mistakes and errors that these banks do under these incredibly highly paid chief executives. So if another one needs to go, I won't be shedding any tears over that.
Well, you make a really good point. This is the point you made, the UK to be the second worst economy in the G7 in 2023. This is actually despite an upgrade. So the IMF says the UK's output is to grow by 0.4% during 2023, which is actually faster than Germany, but slower than any other country in the group of G7. This is the G7 group. It's an upgrade by 0.7 percentage points. This compares with their previous forecast. And just in terms of that, I mean, it's pretty woeful, isn't it?
Yes. These are rounding errors, by the way. When the IMF says this, they'll revise those figures. They're too small to be of any great significance. Basically, 0.4% is zero growth, pretty much. And the UK, Germany is having a bad time of it, although obviously historically it's had much better growth than us, and its per capita income, per head of income, average income is much higher than the UK's now. So yes, Germany's right now is a little bit worse. What's the problem here? Well, it's the same problem that we've had for 30 years. This country does not invest enough. If you look at the rate of investment as a percentage of our national income, which is how economists rank countries, which obviously have different levels of income, the amount of the money that we get as an economy every year that we reinvest to create jobs, to boost productivity, is much lower than all of those other countries, which means that we don't have a decent productivity, which means that we don't have decent wages. Wages in this country are not due to return to their 2008 level until 2026-27. That is nearly 20 years in which the average person in this country has not seen a pay rise. That's not their fault. It's because our economy does not invest enough and does not produce enough. And of course, what we've now got added to that is Brexit, which is making it difficult to trade abroad, which is has reduced the number of people in our labour market because so many Europeans have gone home.
All of which was foreseen. All of which was foreseen, and the government really could have had contingency planning.
Sorry, say that again.
Well, it was foreseen, wasn't it? There would be difficulties if you enact that law, which was the will of the British people. Then the government should have made contingency plans, and it's
very difficult to make contingency plans. The plan was to cut off our trade with our largest neighbour, nearly half of our exports.
Well, it wasn't. It was about taking back control.
Yeah, but you have to live with the consequences of taking back control. And of course, what taking back control means is we now make our own regulations, which is
well, we don't actually. I mean, we should, but we don't.
Well, no, but that was the point. When people said let's take back control, what they meant was that the British Parliament should be making the laws and regulations which cover the economy as well as other things.
Indeed.
The problem is that means that our exporters now have to comply, or will have to comply when this is processed, with two sets of regulations. You've increased the amount of red tape, not reduced it. The simple mechanism, Margaret Thatcher's creation, the single market, was let's have all the businesses in this massive 350 million people market of the European Union facing one set of regulations. That was Margaret Thatcher's genius. And now what we've done is we've said, no, let's have lots of different countries, or at least the UK, having its own regulations. So companies now have to comply with more regulations. And you can see this most of all in Northern Ireland, where we've got this massively complicated system now of trade. And we have this extraordinary situation of Rishi Sunak saying to the people of Northern Ireland, after he did the deal, good for him, got that deal done, you've now got the benefits of both the British single market and the European single market. Well, duh, we all had those benefits.
Yeah, well, that's not. But you're right.
We really cannot say anymore Brexit has helped. Because that was the will of the British people, but we're living with the consequences.
Well, we put a question to the British people. They voted to leave. And the fact is, the politicians, we haven't left. We've left Northern Ireland. We've abandoned Northern Ireland. We put a border in the IOC.
In what sense have we not left?
Well, we've abandoned Northern Ireland and all the citizens, and they're in a no-man's land. Anyway, I don't want to get distracted by Brexit.
No, hang on. Just let's deal with the Northern Ireland problem. The Northern Ireland problem was absolutely intrinsic to leaving. the Northern Ireland Agreement said there has to be an open border between the North and the South. That was absolutely critical.
But who said that? Remember, of course, it was actually the chronology was led by the EU, and we fell into the trap, and Theresa May fell into the trap of following that chronology.
Well, I don't understand what you mean by chronology. In the end, the negotiations had to end up in a single place. So however you ordered them, in the end, we had to deal with the Northern Ireland problem. The Northern Ireland problem was absolutely intrinsic. You can't have an open border between the South and the North of Northern Ireland and have a border between the South and the North of Northern Ireland, which you have to do.
Well, there are different ways that you could have had a border. You could have had a technological border.
Honestly, let's not perpetuate myths about this. If there had been other ways, we would have found them.
I don't agree. I don't agree. You had a bunch of politicians who literally did not want to leave. You had a bunch of Remainers who did not want to give us a good deal. The Windsor framework simply doesn't work.
Let me just ask you. Let's reverse this the questioning here. Do you think, as it sounds like you're a Brexiteer, do you think?
Well, I was an MEP.
Fine. Well, do you think that there was or there is still a mechanism by which the UK, outside of its largest market, imposing trade barriers, regulatory regimes, which we didn't have before, can be better off economically? Because very, very few economists, almost none, ever thought that was true and agreed it was the will of the British people. It had to happen. All I'm saying is that if you're wondering why the UK is now performing badly economically, you can't just wipe away that will of the British people and say, oh, it's nothing to do with
Well,
Brexit.
I think we're also getting slightly distracted. But the European market is declining. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but also the fact is we live in a global world, and actually, when you look at those ties, there are trade deals to be done.
There are, but they're with countries with whom we have much smaller trade. The single largest block of countries, the single largest country, in effect, because it's a single block that we deal with, is the EU. About half of our exports. So, yes, we can do trade deals with other countries. By the way, the ones that we've done so far, that Liz Truss used to trumpet when she was the trade minister, all rolled over the EU agreement. So we didn't gain anything. We just said, let's have the same agreement that we were in when we were in the EU. The new trade deals, like with Australia, are actually not beneficial to the EU. We were so keen to do that one to show that it was possible to do it that we've sold out our farmers. So they've now got a much worse deal than they had before. The new trade deals are all with countries with whom we have a little trade. The big trading bloc is the one right next door to us, and talk to any exporter or indeed importer from the EU and they are tearing their hair out at how difficult it is to trade now when it was so simple before.
Well, I agree with that, but it's also about looking to future markets. The CTPP, that's important in terms of the future growth. Europe is a declining market. We're going down a rabbit hole slightly here, but obviously...
the reason I raise it is that normally in these conversations we ignore the elephant in the room, which was Brexit. So we talk about all the other things that are going wrong with the British economy, and we have a lot of things. We have wages that are way too low, makes it far too easy to employ people cheaply on zero-hour contracts.
Well, that's because lots of people also came here cheaply through the single market and freedom of movement.
And what we then had was all the workers we need because we haven't got enough workers in this country. Why are there fruit?
Why don't we train our own?
Because we haven't got enough people.
We've got 5.2 million people not employed and not in training.
And if only they wanted to do that work and they lived in the right place.
Well, they should do that work.
Well, but you say that.
I do.
Wouldn't it be lovely? Wouldn't it be lovely if people did the work that you wanted them to do? But in the end, if you're a believer in markets, which I think you probably are, you have to accept the choice of people in those markets. And we've seen that British people do not want to pick fruit.
Well, why not?
Europeans were happy to come and pick fruit, so why haven't we let them? British people do not want to do care work. What a shame. But why not? Because the money is
So you want a cheap solution to basically import people from other countries to do jobs that we should be training British people for. And I would agree we need to pay care workers far more. And that would make it more attractive, wouldn't it?
In the short term, yes, we need those people. In the medium term, we should be raising the wages of those people to make it more attractive to British people, and then employers would be glad to have the British workers. But the question you raised at the beginning was, why is the UK the second worst performer in the G7 for growth at the moment? And we have been consistently. So this is not about this year. And I'm trying to give you, as an economist, the reasons for this. And what we can't do is just ignore the elephants in the room.
But you equally can't blame Brexit for everything.
No, I don't blame it for everything. Absolutely not. We've had a 30-year problem. Our investment rate has been lower for 30 years. This has happened under all previous governments. It's a structural feature of the British economy. We have brilliant financial sector services that we export. Very little else. We have a brilliant automotive sector, chemicals, life sciences, but we're too narrow in what we do. Look at Germany. It's got a much wider range of exports. France, it's got these big champion companies. We've allowed many of our companies to go to be sold abroad. So there are many reasons why the British economy is not as good as, doesn't perform as well. But you can't simply, that's all I'm saying, you can't simply ignore one of the reasons, which unfortunately is Brexit. And I agree, we made a decision. I'm not trying to reverse the decision. We have to live with it, but we also can't ignore it. And people who voted for Brexit have to own that decision.
Very good to talk to you, Michael. We could chat all day, no doubt. Michael Jacobs there, political economy professor and former advisor to Chancellor and Prime Minister Gordon Brown. I don't think we see eye to eye on that particular issue. After the break, we're going to talk more about what we were just discussing, actually, about the Windsor frame doesn't work, or the Windsor framework, Northern Ireland, how we've abandoned Northern Ireland. We put a border in the Irish Sea. We haven't Brexited. And I keep saying this. I'll be joined by Lance Foreman, former MEP, who was in the Brexit party. He's also a businessman. This is TalkTV.